What is going on, everybody? Travis Fowler, Hark Rider, back for another edition of the Four Corner Podcast. So now you know what that means. It's time to talk wrestling because this week it was all about big business. That was the theme for this week's Dynamite. And honestly, it was the first time in a while, at least in my own opinion, that AEW actually had a focal point this week. And I don't mean that as in like the Dynamite shows themselves have been bad or anything like that. Obviously, with Sting's retirement that took place a couple weeks ago, that was a huge focal point in the wrestling world. But still, it seemingly was overshadowed by everything that was going on in WWE, especially with WrestleMania so close. And it really felt like AEW was the main talking point this week for professional wrestling. Yeah, I know we have more WrestleMania stuff to talk about here in just a little bit, but everybody kind of knew. Actually, I don't even want to say kinda. We all knew what this week's episode of Dynamite was going to entail. They called it big business for a reason. And yeah, the past few weeks with Sting's retirement, the full-time debuts of AEW on both Kazuchika Okada and Will Ospreay was a big deal. But those were all kind of expected, as was what happened on Wednesday as well. I mean, they announced this show for Boston, and the graphic called Big Business showed, like we showed y'all here last week, Boston was in the background spelled as Bosston. So that really could only signify that one person was showing up. And they really did a very similar thing with CM Punk when he debuted in AEW when it was called The First Dance. And they didn't waste any time. They just shot to the crowd. You heard the chants, and then Cult of Personality hit. And they really did something very similar here. They started off the show, and you saw a Mercedes-Benz pull up, and I think that right there should have given the indication. Once you saw that emblem on the car, that was pretty much you know who's in this car. It's a Mercedes. What do you expect it to be otherwise? And sure enough, they hit the music, brand new music, and then CEO shows up on the screen. And most people already knew what that was signifying because she had already referred to herself as CEO in other interviews, even when she was still working with the New Japan and Stardom crew. And then the graphic does the flip and shows Mercedes Moné officially. She walks through the tunnel back on to weekly television programming for the first time in 2 years. And that is insane to think that she's been gone from our regularly scheduled programming for a 2-year stretch. I, for one, was very pleased to see her. She looks great. It looks like she is very much at peace with the decision that she has made and with the result of that decision. We heard Boston was loud and proud for their homegrown gal. And it was a really good start for Mercedes. I thought the promo was done very well. You can tell she was very emotional in the beginning and then was able to revert right back to the professionalism that we have become accustomed to when it comes to Mercedes Moné, formerly known as Sasha Banks. And I really liked her presentation. Now, I'll be the first to admit the CEO name's going to have to grow on me a little bit. I understand why they're doing it. It's kind of like I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was like, well, CEO is obviously just another big name for a higher level boss, which is fine. I get that. Do I necessarily enjoy the nickname? Not right now. It's not one of those things that triggers me as being like, oh yeah, this is cool kind of thing. It felt very forced, especially since the music at the beginning started the CEO chants. And of course, people got behind it because they're fans of hers. And like I said, it may grow on me. It's just not something I'm feeling right off the bat. But she carried herself exactly as the character she wants to portray. And props to her. And we saw her throughout the night interacting with talents, specifically Riho, and then in the main event, she got involved helping Willow Nightingale and saving her from a beatdown by Julia Hart and Sky Blue. And it looks like they're going to focus their attention for Mercedes' first match on Julia Hart, and I would argue the TBS title as well. I think that's the route they're going to end up going. I can now see Willow as being like a backup for Mercedes because obviously, as they made mention, those were the two women that were in the finals for the first ever New Japan Strong Women's title that was now in the possession of, I always feel like I'm going to mispronounce her name, but it looks like it's Julia, only spelled with a G. And I could be very off base. More than likely, I probably am because I don't watch a lot of New Japan or Stardom for that matter. But I try to keep up a little bit with some of the bigger names there. I really do think that this is going to be good for AEW. And something that I think gets lost on people is just because it's not the level of success you want doesn't mean that they're not successful. And I do think this is going to be something that helps AEW, at least with the niche and core audience of the product. The ratings came back, and I think they still estimated it around that 790-ish to 800,000 viewers. And that's pretty much a steady viewership now. And there was something that's been talked about amongst wrestling fans, and specifically on the 83 Weeks podcast, which there's two talking points from that. The first is there's not really any growth with AEW, and they're right, there's not. You don't really see a trend of an upward motion where you're getting fans packed in to fill arenas, except for your bigger shows like Sting's retirement or Big Business this past week, sold out and was at capacity, it looks like, for both shows. So in that sense, AEW succeeded in what they were doing for both AEW Revolution and Big Business. But on a week-to-week basis, we've seen them struggle filling 3,000 seats in an arena. And that's had me thinking of different things, because people have posed the question for weeks, what can AEW do to maybe curve this situation and either start getting more fans in the building or more viewership into the show? And it's really hard to figure out exactly what exactly it's going to take to get that. Eric Bischoff's been very vocal on his podcast that you need somebody outside of Tony Khan to really run this and see what they can do to right the wrongs of this ship. And again, I don't think they're necessarily wrong. It's just not what we perceive as being successful. I've talked about it on this show before that maybe AEW really isn't interested in growth, which some people would find as, if you're not growing, then you're dying. It's that old saying of evolution. You either adapt or you perish. And I understand people's thought process with that. Matter of fact, I would argue that I agree more firmly with that thought process than I do with the comfortability factor, because it seems like that's what AEW is it's a comfortable product. It's comfortable with who they target. It's comfortable with the business they are doing. And at least from a viewer's perspective, it looks like their parent company, WBD, is pretty comfortable with what they've done and what they put out for a product. And I've said that if WBD is happy with the AEW shows, then that's all that really matters, because with the television deals that I'm sure they're going to be renegotiating for here sooner rather than later, as long as the numbers are hitting what they consider to be favorable numbers, then it really doesn't matter. And Matt Kuhn on X actually said something similar to the fact that the Nielsen TV ratings that people still want to talk about, because, we all are nostalgic for the Monday Night Wars and during the WCW, WWE heyday and the war back and forth between the two companies who had the better show. This is not the same direct competition as that was, but we all still look to see what is successful when it comes to viewership. But you can't do that. With streaming these days, most people do stream. So your week-to-week television product being determined by TV ratings isn't necessarily the most fair route to measure success. It's what we've got, and I'm sure there's other ways that you can factor in viewership for a show. But for now, that's all we got. And as long, again, as those TV ratings don't hinder AEW and their parent business partner, then I don't think there's anything that they need to worry about. More specifically, this is also a point that was brought up on this past week's 83 Weeks podcast in a little bit of a different way. But I started thinking this last week, and I talked about it with my trainer and a good friend of mine here locally. You've seen his interview here on this very channel, Justin Lee. He and I were talking, and he was always critical of how AEW handles the business side of things because he himself is more of a business mindset person. He teaches business as a teacher, and I was going back and forth with him, and I really had something come into my mind that hadn't really presented itself before. That, in my opinion, AEW is the new ECW. And let me explain what I mean by that. You look at AEW and you look at their entire product. They have a lot of international talent. A lot of different wrestling styles have been broadcasted on their television shows, whether it be for premium live events or their weekly shows, and they target a niche audience. What's that sound like to you? That sounds like 90s ECW. ECW was a niche product with a lot of international talent, such as like Juventud Guerrera, Ultimo Dragon, and Rey Mysterio, mind you. And they had a lot of different varieties of professional wrestling. They would have Taipei death matches, and then you could also see Lucha Libre with Psychosis, Juventud, and Rey. Then you would see just a straight up wrestling match with like Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero. You would also still see other hardcore matches and other guys implement different styles into the ECW product. There's a lot of similarities between AEW and ECW, and I think it's not too far of a stretch as to say that AEW is, I guess, how do I put this? The bastard child, if you will, or illegitimate child. That's the better way to put it, of ECW. They have a lot of similarities in regards to how they put their product out on TV. And 83 Weeks said something similar, but they brought in another factor into there that what ECW did a great job of doing was presenting themselves as the alternative underdog product. They didn't go out each week stating that they were bigger and better than WCW or WWE. They just simply said, we're better at a professional wrestling show, and why don't you come check us out and see it for yourself? They positioned themselves as the underdog, always fighting upward. And that's something that Eric Bischoff had actually agreed with Conrad Thompson on, who had put that out there of like, why not go more of the ECW route and embrace that underdog as opposed to trying to say that we can hang with the big wig? Why not say, yeah, we're the small guy here. But that's not a big deal because look what we can do for our wrestling show. And I think if they did go with more of that and leave a lot of the WWE references and trash talk out of their show, I think that would go a long way into, one, helping other fans be like, oh, look, they're not trying to be WWE. They really are the alternative, as opposed to being a copy and paste just with different wrestlers. And when you put that into perspective and combine it with the way there are similarities between AEW and ECW, why not go that route? And why not reposition yourself? I think it would do better for All Elite Wrestling to be more of that underdog extreme championship wrestling variety of a television show. And maybe they'll lean into that more. Maybe that is something we'll see down the line. Maybe somebody is listening and thinking that that's the route to go. Because I can tell you also, I agree with some of the other people that have said this online, that over the last couple of weeks, maybe even a little bit longer, AEW's weekly Dynamite show especially has had great consistency, It still presents good matches along with progressing stories. I think they're finally getting it and putting their foot really in the hole of a great, consistent product. They're still going to have those matches that no, they don't have a story. And guess what? WWE does them too. You don't always need a full, in depth story to get a certain match. Prime example, we're filming this Saturday morning, and tonight on Collision, they've advertised Bryan Danielson versus Shibata. That's a good match, and it doesn't really even need a story other than you've got two great wrestlers on your roster, one of which who is about to have a one-on-one match with the, as many view, greatest wrestler of this generation currently, Danielson and Will Ospreay at AEW Dynasty in St. Louis coming up. This is a way for Danielson to test himself, and we do know that this is Danielson's last full-time year as an in-ring worker, so he's already made mention that he had several lists of opponents that he wanted to make sure he hit in this last run, because his AEW run is all about just having fun and just being a wrestler, and he has done that to perfection. He's had good stories, he's had great matches, and he's wrestled whoever he's really wanted to. This guy, within a very short period of time, will have wrestled Zack Sabre Jr., Will Ospreay, and Shibata, all within about a 2-month time span. That's insanely good, and he has always delivered on his product as a great wrestler, giving you great wrestling matches. His match with Eddie Kingston at Revolution was a prime example of that as well. So I think AEW is really doing great about establishing themselves and making themselves more different, and not always trying to go the WWE copy route. They're not a cheap knockoff. They can be a viable product, and I think we're starting to see all of those pieces to that puzzle come together and form this amazing picture of AEW. But now let's shift gears and let's kind of go back to the world of WWE, because yesterday there was a huge announcement that caught everybody off guard, including myself. And this just goes to show that we are definitely not in the McMahon era of WWE anymore, because it was announced that during WrestleMania weekend, Josh Barnett is presenting Bloodsport, which is affiliated with GCW. He is going to present that next Bloodsport event during WrestleMania weekend. And who was announced to show up as part of that, which is also the GCW Collective show? Shayna Baszler. That's right. WWE contracted wrestler Shayna Baszler is making an appearance for an independent show. Who would have thought that? Nobody would have called that a year ago. Nobody would have called that 4 years ago or 5 years ago. WWE is really starting to go out of their way to try to get a foothold into more of the global wrestling scene than they ever have before. They've already displayed that when they had Charlie Dempsey, the son of William Regal, go over and do a match stint with All Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, news came out later that things didn't go exactly as they would have hoped for either side, but nonetheless, they had a WWE contracted wrestler go and wrestle for another promotion. And this is what we're getting again in the form of Shayna Baszler showing up with GCW and Josh Barnett's Bloodsport. Like, that's insane to me that this is the time that we're living in. And I love it, because y'all heard me last week. I put the reel out there on social media and it got over 400 plus views, and several other people agreed with it that tribalism needs to end in wrestling, because professional wrestling as a genre is always better when there's healthy competition and fans that love the product. And that's the time we're living in. I've always said I do believe firmly that the Monday Night War era, the late 90s era, 2000s of wrestling is never going to be topped again when it comes to the star power and the impact that it had on pop culture overall. I don't think we're ever going to see that again. But this era in wrestling, this modern era that we're living in right now, is pretty darn close. With everything that has happened over the last couple of years, it really does feel that wrestling has hit another boom, and it's a great time to be a fan. And Shayna Baszler showing up in GCW, Charlie Dempsey going to AJPW for his stint, is just a sign that WWE really is starting to grow and venture into other wrestling markets, and that just opens so many doors. Maybe one day we'll get a AEW WWE crossover event. We've got New Japan and AEW that work together with Forbidden Door, but the ultimate Forbidden Door has yet to be open. Could we see it? I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Only time will tell, but I think if things continue to go the route that they are, I think it looks very favorable that we could see a lot of unprecedented moments occur sooner rather than later. Now, let's talk SmackDown and Raw for that instance, because two guys, being Cody Rhodes and The Rock, delivered two different sets of promos this week. Cody had a very emotional one-on-one interview with Michael Cole in the ring that got a great babyface reaction. And then on SmackDown, still getting a babyface reaction, but still playing up the heel side of things, The Rock doing another rock concert, which he knocked out of the park again. And this whole feud has been great. They are building this spectacularly, and I really don't know what's going to happen at Mania. And that's what I enjoy most, is that we really just don't know. And Rock coming out and doing these long-winded social media promos, which have been great, and then coming out on our television screen for the last 3 consecutive weeks, which I don't know if he's scheduled for the next few weeks to follow, but him being on our shows for the last 3 weeks has been absolutely insane in 2024. Who would have ever expected this? You know, all the turn of events that have taken place have led us here, and it's given us great television, and it makes everything feel that much important. WrestleMania always feels big, but now it feels bigger, and the card is shaping up so nicely. We've gotten the announcement of the 6-pack ladder match for the Undisputed Tag Titles, which is unreal. They're going to have 6 teams for a total of 12 men in one match. Like, I thought having 8 to 10 guys for a Money in the Bank ladder match back when it was a Mania tradition was insane. You've got 12 guys going for these tag titles, and I really wish that this would be where they split the tag belts. Some people feel like that's still going to happen. I had some conversations with some friends of mine earlier this week that they still feel like it is a possibility. I feel like it's a possibility. There are some that feel like we still should just keep the tag belts as one, because there may not be enough teams to really support 2 different tag divisions for each show. I don't think that's exactly true. I think each show has enough teams that you can get away with 2 separate tag divisions and 2 tag titles, especially with them playing into more of the brand split over these last few months. I do think that you can pull it off at this point in time, but that doesn't seem to be the route they're going. At least that's on the surface level of what we see. Things could change. We still have about 3 weeks or so until Mania, so anything can happen from now until then. We also got the official announcement of the Intercontinental title match, which some people weren't too happy about, that it will be Gunter taking on Sami Zayn. I think that's a great matchup, and it's still going to be a great match, but some people think it should have been Chad Gable. And we are in an era where we see WWE catering to more of the fans' wants. I mean, The Rock, speaking of, came out last night to what we thought was going to be his theme that he's been using for the last 10 years, and then all of a sudden, midway through it, you get hit with a little tagline and a change of pitch, and we hear Hollywood Rock theme, which is something I wanted as well as many others. I even tagged Rock in a tweet last week from a video that had been fan-made with the Hollywood Rock theme imposed with his new entrance, and even I was like, hey, Rock, this is the assignment. And he comes out this week week and it changes. It was beautiful. I think the presentation is absolutely complete. We've got the Hollywood '03 Rock with his vest style and his pants, but the vest being his '99 corporate style of Rock / 2000-esque in the beginning with that heel mentality. It's a perfect combination. And now I'm going to go back to the original topic at hand and get off of my love and soapbox of Rock's presentation. People do believe that Chad Gable should have been in the Intercontinental title match. Do they add him in there later on? Because it did look like, at least when Sammy got the roll-up win, that a shoulder was not on the canvas. So you can make the argument that Chad has a right to be in the match. Do they make that happen? I don't know. And I don't know, based on the announcement we got last night on SmackDown, the triple threat U.S. title match, which I expected to fully happen because the Logan Paul Kevin Owens story wasn't finished yet, but we know what Paul did to Randy Orton in the chamber. So I think a triple threat match actually makes the most sense, and it also protects Randy Orton and his back injury so that he doesn't have to carry the load of a full one-on-one match on Mania with Logan Paul, who we know has been an absolute natural, is honestly the best word to describe Logan Paul's run in WWE. So I love that triple threat match. I don't know if we'll get two for another secondary title. I wouldn't have a problem if they do, but I also am looking forward to Zayn and Gunter one-on-one. We also got the official announcement last night. Jimmy Uso has accepted, so it will be brother versus brother, Uso versus Uso. It's a tradition of WrestleMania. Brett and Owen did it at 10. Jeff and Matt did it at 25, and now Jimmy and Jay doing it here at 40. It's fun. It's going to be a fun match. And how interesting that all three of those matches were 15 years apart. So that's kind of a fun little notion there. We also got the announcement of AJ Styles versus LA Knight, and I'm interested to see what teams they put in the ladder match. So much stuff is going on with WrestleMania, and one more gripe, if you will, that Austin Theory sell from the stunner into the RKO, you might want to work on that one, because that was just a little too out there to believe, if you will. But that's what we have for today's topics. What did you think of Mercedes Moné's AEW debut? And are you looking forward to the WrestleMania with the card we have now? Or do you think there's some changes to it? Sound off in those comments down below. And make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Make sure you like this video and you hit the bell notification so you're notified anytime a video is uploaded to the channel. Make sure you're following us on our social media pages, Facebook, X, and Instagram. And I will, of course, be back again next week to talk more pro wrestling as we inch closer and closer to WrestleMania. So guys, take care, have a blessed week, and I will see y'all again next time. Just continue to love pro wrestling.